Hey everyone, welcome back to Path of Exile, and on today's video we're doing a live overview / introduction of the character that I'm currently playing as, which will get featured on a build guide later down this week. This character is a Gladiator that is using a Spectral shield throw to deal the big fat bleed DPS. And in order to do that, first we gotta understand that Spectral shield throw requires a very thick shield in order to deal damage. In this case, physical damage. For that, we're using a very thick shield with a lot of armor, and as such, this is scaling the hits and at the same time scaling the bleed that is getting procced from those initial hits. This shield was crafted through the Harvest League mechanic, and it took me a little while because for the longest time ever, this thing didn't want to roll the increased armor hybrid. It kept rolling life and armor, which is pretty useless. But once it hit what I wanted, I just added the resistances. I went with Hillock on Fortification to get the 28 quality, and then I crafted the 18 quality through the crafting bench. Again, the shield is absolutely mandatory, because it is a Spectral shield throw after all, but having a shield that is pretty thick is mandatory as well, because that is going to scale the magnitude of our hits and as such the bleed damage that comes from them. Moving on to the armor, life, resistances, and this one actually was being used by my Assassin Corralash League starter, but eventually got repurposed for this character, and through the harvest I was able to craft it and get it to a position where I'm pretty confident it is pretty useful. Or rather, I'm actually pretty happy with it is right now. If you want to see a guide of how to craft things that are useful, not, GG items that are mirror worthy but useful, let me know down in the comments, because I've been having a blast playing with Harvest and I've been crafting pretty similar stuff to this. For example, the helmet that I'm currently wearing, which has life, resists, and the Spectral shield throw damage enchantment. I started off a helmet with that enchantment and slowly crafted it into this. And we are able to do this because we do not need accuracy as we're using Resolute technique in the tree, so we can sacrifice those accuracy modifiers for additional resistances, which is how I got this helmet right here. Moving on to the jewelry, we want negative mana cost on all of them, because we want to reduce the mana cost of a Spectral shield throw as much as possible, to the point where it's wasting or spending as little mana as possible. And the reason as to why is we want to evade investing into mana leech on the tree or on the gear, because we want to maximize those slots for damage and whatnot. So this is why I decided to put non-channeling skills have negative total mana cost of skills to every single piece of jewelry. And the first ring has vulnerability on hit, life, resists, and that's pretty much what you want as a base. If you can get fist damage attacks as an additional thing, that's great. If not, that's nothing to, get frustrated about. Just the vulnerability and the resists. On the other ring we have damage with bleeding, life, and resists. Again, damage with bleeding is the mandatory thing. Anything else that enables more damage is a bonus. On the amulet we want damage over time multiplier and life and resists. Face damage over time multiplier specifically. Anything else is a bonus again. Also, I allocated Command of Steel instead of, other more potentially strong modifiers, and I'll tell you why in a bit, because this has to do with the skill tree. The gloves have life, a resist, and fist damage over time multiplier and damage with bleeding. They are elder influenced, and something like this or as close to this is mandatory, because both the damage over time multiplier and the bleeding are pretty much scaling the amount of bleed that we are doing, or the bleed damage that we're doing, and it is a pretty nice combination of modifiers, not gonna lie. So if you can get something similar, go ahead and do it. Actually no, if you can get something similar if you're gonna play this. For the belt, we're using a Darkness Enthroned, because Darkness Enthroned is pretty much the best belt nowadays, in my opinion at least, and mine is enchanted with enemies main by you take 8% increased damage over time. This comes from the new Labyrinth versions that scale the Labyrinth to level 83. I don't recall which one it was, but it allows you to enchant belts. and I was able to get this on my second run, because the first run I forgot that I was using a Darkness Enthroned that was corrupted, and you cannot modify corrupted items, so I played myself, sadly. So I had to run it again, and on the first attempt at the font, I was able to get the damage over time modifier. Besides that, the Darkness Enthroned is hosting 2 jewels which have life, increased damage over time while holding a shield, and resistances. Both are pretty much identical, and I recommend aiming for something as identical or as close to mine as possible. Finally, for the gear, we're using the red trail, and the reason as to why we're using the red trail is because we are using a golden rule. Now, the red trail gives you a frenzy charge on hit while you are bleeding. You are bleeding because you are reflecting your bleeds through the golden rule. Bleeding you inflict is reflected to you. However, bleeding that you are reflecting is going to pretty much one-shot you, because you are scaling that bleed to, you know, pretty high numbers that no amount of defense is gonna be able to sustain. But in order to survive that, we are also using a Watcher's Eye with unaffected by bleeding while affected by malevolence. This is why we're using malevolence as an aura instead of pride. Even though pride gives you more damage, it doesn't make you pseudo immune to bleed, which is why we're using this setup. And it is a nice setup because by getting additional frenzy charges, we have a lot of damage that we will not be able to get otherwise, and there is little reason to not utilize this setup. The only downside is that you're pretty much sacrificing life or more resistances or attributes that you may be missing by doing exactly this setup. So that is pretty much the downside, but I think the upsides are too high not to invest into that. So looking at the skill tree, we pretty much are gonna be rushing Crimson Dance, because Crimson Dance in a bleeding build is mandatory. After all, you cannot rely on enemies walking away in order to take additional bleeding damage, especially endgame bosses. That's not going to be a reality, which is why we took Crimson Dance. We're also taking Call to Arms, and the reason as to why is because that makes War Cries instant, and that means we can put the War Cry on our left click, not right click, and that means that every time we walk, we're gonna cast that War Cry, which is giving us a quick burst of health regeneration and endurance charges, because War Cries got reworked, and Enduring Cry specifically now gives you an endurance charge whenever you cast it. Especially when we are surrounded by enemies or stronger enemies, we're gonna sustain those endurance charges non-stop. And since it's on the way, there is pretty much no reason not to take it. At the same time, we're gonna be synergizing that because we're taking Escalation, which is a new node, and we are taking that because we are using a Thread of Hope. We're using a Thread of Hope because it allows us to take Cleaving, Razor's Edge, Unwavering Stance, and Escalation without taking all the nodes leading up to those notables. And this thing originally wasn't here. In fact, I wasn't gonna use that, but eventually I decided to do that because there was really no reason not to do it. Free Unwavering Stance, since it's no longer over here. Escalation, which is giving you more life when you Warcry, and some damage for each time you Warcry recently, which is pretty huge, and there is really no reason not to do that. And Cleaving, which is giving us damage with ailments and bleeding stuff while pretty much not requiring anything else. And Razor's Edge, which is also giving us damage over time multiplier for free. We're also taking Resolute Technique, and my current plan is probably ditching the axe that I'm using and go with a sword with similar modifiers and attempt to corrupt the sword into getting Resolute Technique as an implicit. That way I can drop this and use those points in something else. But so far that is pretty much the character. As I said, we are a Gladiator, we're taking the bleed stuff, and we're also taking Painforged and Versatile Combatant so that we have some block chance. I know it's 46, and I know to Gladiator purists this is pretty offensive, but don't worry, through the use of Romi's Concoction and a Tempest Shield, we are able to get the magical number of 69, and you all know that 69 is pretty good. Eventually though, I may be able to get more block, because I'm thinking about taking this node eventually. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that, but yeah. As for things that I allocated on the amulet, I'm using Command of Steel, and the reason as to why I'm using Command of Steel is because I'm getting increased damage per chance to block attack damage. We are getting 69 block attack damage once we get Promise Concoction and Tempest Shield, and yeah, that's pretty much gonna be it for this overview. If there's still time, I'll cram gameplay into this video, otherwise that's gonna be it for me, or at least the audio recorded portion of this video. I don't know how long it was, hopefully it wasn't that long, so I can cram gameplay without extending this video even further. Gem overview quickly: Spectral Shield Throw, Brutality, Swift Affliction, Unbound Ailments, Deadly Ailments, and Vicious Predictables. I'll be putting the POV on the description, and if anyone else wants it specifically, I'll also comment down below. Otherwise, yeah, that's it for this video. Yes, that is a Cortex. The plan is to play, you know, the Cortex for the build guide itself, so I'm gonna blue ball you on that. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe, rate, subscribe again, and again, and again, and I'll catch you again on the next video. Peace out.